Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy! And what do you have for us today?
Zählt und später durchgesägt. Honka, Honka, nimm mich ein Acht. Was hast du da versteckt in deinem Dachbodenschacht? Da liegen alte
So,
Hold up. What the fuck? You can't just... I wasn't prepared. No, I wasn't even prepared for anything, let alone what the fuck.
So that's a song called Honka Honka. That is about the serial killer I'm going to tell you about today. You can find that song on Spotify. It is in German, if you didn't understand it. The lyrics is the details of this case. So,
did they do the murdering, or they just made a song about it?
They made a song about him, and it's called Honka Honka because that's the name of this here feller.
Honka?
His last name's Honka. His name's Fredrich Paul Honka. We're going to call him Fritz. That's his nickname. And he's a serial killer who targeted prostitutes from the 1970s, or from 1970 to 1975. But instead of the US or the UK, we're going to go on to Germany.
All right.
Like we've seen with a lot of the cases that we've done, the cases where they really don't like their serial killers as much as the US and the UK. So a lot of the information is questionable or contradicting. So we are going to have to cross through that. Plus, I had to use Google Translate on a lot of articles to figure out what the heck they said. So Google Translate and I became really good friends with this case.
All right.
Your triggers for this case, aside from the murder-ins, it gave me a case of hypochondria, and I ended up with a serious case of unstoppable itchiness for a while. And just thinking about it is making my head itch, but...
Maybe it was all you had lice.
Fuck you, I ain't got me no lice.
Sounds like you did.
So, Claire, since you like to stop listening when I'm talking, try to stop listening when I get to the part of the itchiness, otherwise you're going to be itchy.
It kind of reminds me when we discovered you had a touch of the Rhinesfield syndrome. We did that case about the feller that drank blood.
All right. So our murderous sumbitch this week, and I know I'm not going to have the German accent. I tried. I sound like an idiot. The best you get out of me is my nasally talk or my really bad Southern accent. But this guy's name is Fredrich Paul Honka. He went by the nickname Fritz, which is what, like I said, we'll be calling him. And I feel bad for child Fritz, but adult Fritz becomes a lazy, violent alcoholic. And when he's very drunk, he would be very aggressive to women. And this fella only sought the company of women shorter than him, which I kind of understand. However, he ain't a tall man. He's 5'5". And no offense to our 5'5" men out there, but, you know, he ain't a tall feller. And he also sought out women who were toothless.
Well, I understand that.
What? I need some clarification as to why you identify with why he prefers them.
I can understand the men folk, because how many cases have we read where they knock the tooths out so one doesn't catch on their peppy? He had a bad experience.
Well, he feared mutilation during oral sex, which is his preferred method of sex. My opinion is he preferred oral because he didn't have to do anything. He just lay there.
Well, turns out if he's paying for it, he can just lay there regardless.
Right. I literally have that in my notes. If he's paying for it, he didn't want to have to work for it.
Although, I know it's out of the time frame since you said the 70s, but you ever seen the movie Teeth? That could have had him afraid of vaginas as well.
I haven't seen that.
It says where this gal's got teeth, spoiler alert for everybody who hasn't seen it, teeth in her vagina, and it bites off penises. It's really messed up.
I'm just blinking over here.
I would say it's a real scary movie for the menfolk.
Especially the menfolk that like to do the rapings.
Well, you know what? I don't know if it's real or not, but in that movie I want to say it's some sort of legend of...
And that's how he lost his penis.
That could make him of a fear in vaginas. And then teeth in general don't seem like a real good, nice thing to do. So that's where I understand his thought process of going for the toothless ladies.
Well, here's the thought. Perhaps don't force women to suck on your dirty pee-pee, and then you don't have to worry about the mutilations.
Is it force if he's paying for it?
Mm-hmm.
He forces the prostitutes after he pays for it?
Yeah, because they get one look or one whiff of his junk, and they're like, yeah, I'm good. And then he gets mad.
Here's your money back. Does he get mad because they take his money because they're like, I feel like I need to be compensated for just looking and smelling that, and then he got mad?
We'll discuss further as we get there. You're trying to jump ahead.
Well,
You already know too many details, woman. So
it's because you're not talking fast enough. I thought you caffeinated.
you got distracted with your teeth movie. Fritz's problem with alcohol would prevent him from maintaining long-term relationships with women, and that's why he turns to prostitutes.
Sounds also like his hygiene.
He meets women, prostitutes, in the red light district at certain bars. And that's a brief rundown on good old Fritz, but let's rewind back to the beginning, shall we?
By the way, I didn't get distracted with the teeth. I don't have a penis, and that movie was disturbing.
So Fritz was born July 31st, 1935. And anyone who knows anything about history knows that Germany during the 1930s was not a good place to be. Fritz was the third of 10 children. 3 of his siblings died during birth. Fritz's mother, Elsa Honka, she worked as a cleaning lady. His dad, Fritz Honka Sr., was a communist and worked as a joiner. I didn't know what a joiner was, so I did me.
Like, the wood?
Yeah, he is a person who does woodworking that joins pieces of wood, engineered lumber, or synthetic substitutes, such as laminate, to produce more complex items.
Very cool. It's a skill we're trying to craft. Or not really craft, but master, rather.
Yeah.
He's good with his hands.
His Paul was, yes. And now his father was a violent alcoholic as well, and he would frequently beat his wife and his children. And after being fired as a joiner, he would eventually get work as a stoker, which I had an idea what a stoker was, but I looked it up just to be sure, and that's like a water tender.
Fire.
Yeah, those are the people that tend to the fires that are running for like a boiler, heating a building or a power steam engine, or it's.
Right. So then he wasn't good at being a joiner.
Well, he left there, and the reason he left there was because Fritz and Fritz Sr. were both sent to Nazi concentration camps in the 40s. Fritz Jr. was in a concentration camp for children, and his father was said to have been sent to a concentration camp for being a communist. Some Russian soldiers freed Fritz Jr., and I did find conflicting articles because some said that his father died in the concentration camps, and then others said that when he got out of the concentration camp, that's when he started working as a stoker. But I don't know, because you can find it either or. It doesn't really matter because it has nothing to do with Fritz Jr. It's a really freaking messed up situation for a child to have to experience.
Maybe they don't mean literally. They mean like when he was dead. Like his dad no longer there. He went through some shit. He saw some shit. He had a hard time. So he died there even though his body was still there.
Right. And that's why I wrote this up the way I did, because that is the way I also interpreted it. You'll see. So after being freed from the concentration camp, I don't think you'll be too surprised when I tell you that returning back to school seemed like a joke to Fritz Jr. I'm just going to call him Fritz, okay? But Fritz was bullied due to the fact that he was short. He also had a speech impediment. He hated his peers. He saw some shit in the concentration camps.
How old was he when he was in the concentration camp? I know you said for children, but how long was he there?
I couldn't find how long he was there for. I just know he was sent there for quite a while. He saw some shit, and they did do some experiments on his paw, or some torture. So it's really hard to find stuff like details on the concentration camp stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've ever done any research on a specific person, but a lot of it is very difficult to find.
Got it. So he went. I was just curious how long.
It wasn't like he got taken and was just there for a short period of time. He was there for a decent amount of time to see some shit.
Yeah. So when he got freed, what year was that? Like the end?
Yeah. Now, his mom, it said she was unable to cope with her 9 children. And this is where I also interpreted your...
They're alive, but they're...
Yeah, this is where I agree with where her husband was alive, but he's dead inside, because it says that he became extremely abusive and alcoholic.
Yeah.
So she did the only thing she could think of to help her children and gave them up to an orphanage. Fritz was one of the children, because she didn't give them all away, just some of them. Fritz, I think because of the things he went through, it made him a difficult child. She sent him to an orphanage, but he would be allowed to visit his family. But whenever he was home from the orphanage, his dad would beat the hell out of him. And then a year after being rescued in 1946, Fritz Sr. died due to health complications from the time that he was in the concentration camp. Just a recap for you. At this point in Fritz's life, he's only 11 years old. He's experienced drunken beatings at the hands of his father. He was ripped away from his family and put into a concentration camp. He was eventually rescued from the camp, reunited with his family. His mom turned around and gave some of her kids away, him being one of them. Then his dad dies. The things that he's experienced in life, I feel bad for little Fritz.
Yeah.
In early 1950, when Fritz was around 15, he started an apprenticeship as a bricklayer, but he had to give it up because he seemed to have an allergic reaction to something, possibly hard work. I did read that he developed cement scabies. And for those that don't know, let me give you a case of the itchies. So scabies is a mite or a teeny tiny parasite, and it's also known sometimes, I didn't know this, as the 7-year itch. that right there, the 7-year itch. I was like, oh, that's disgusting. It's so gross. It's contagious. It's a human infestation by a teeny tiny mite. And the most common symptoms are severe itchiness with a pimple-like rash. And I wasn't sure at this point, because I did go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. What's the difference between like the mites and chiggers? And chiggers are juvenile forms of another type of mite that only bite humans and feed off the human skin, but they don't actually burrow under the flesh like scaby mites.
Yeah.
Super gross.
So I've seen those on a microscopic level, because that's how you diagnose it, for dogs. Never had scabies, just to be clear.
But that's his excuse for not working as the bricklayer.
I could see it's real hard to lay bricks level when you got the case of the scratchies.
So I don't know if he necessarily had an allergic reaction to laying bricks, or so much as that he needs some serious bathing.
So hold up. That was bricklayers what?
He got a job at 15 as a bricklayer. He started an apprenticeship.
So you said he developed an allergy
to bricklaying, but it turns out his allergy wasn't to the bricklaying, it was having scabies.
That's a real, weird. How do you talk to your employer about that one? I've developed an allergy to these here bricks. All right. Good luck to you.
Right. He's 15, and I don't think he really gave a shit. Like, his give a shit meter is so low at this point in his life, and it never goes back up. I feel like if there was ever a time in this kid's life to have just dropped off the face of the planet of ever giving a crap about anything again, whatever he experienced in the concentration camp, he was never the same again. And then you figure once he got released and he was free, to try to pick up a normal life again and then to go back to school just to be bullied by a bunch of little pricks and have your mom give you away, the idea of going to work to just be itchy. I feel bad for this kid. Anyway, when Fritz was 16, he moved to West Germany in 1951 and started work as an unskilled farm worker in a small village. He was also regularly beaten and abused in the village. He did attempt suicide a few times. He was just so unhappy.
Sounds like he's unskilled at that too.
Yeah.
Who's beating him in the town? He's just walking along and people are just kicking him?
So I have a feeling it's other kids, his peers, and as well as...
How small is he?
So you figure as a grown-ass man, he's only 5'5". And that's being generous, because there are articles I read that said he was 5'2".
He really has got to have a horrible work ethic, because how do you go from being a bricklayer to a farmhand and not, beef up in some sort of way that you can smack somebody else?
You figure he was only an apprentice for the bricklayer for less than a year.
Yeah, but they probably had him moving heavy things, is my point.
I think that's why he quit.
He couldn't have stayed twiggy, but a year of moving stuff?
A year max. I don't think he lasted a year, because you figure...
It doesn't take that long to beef up.
It does if you ain't eating.
Fine.
So he's just really unhappy in this village, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until he meets a woman named Margot. I do not have information on Margot. I don't know how old she is. Some of the things say she was a married woman, but he began having an affair with her, and she fell pregnant with this now 16-year-old boy's child.
Ooh.
Yeah. She would eventually give birth to a son that they named Heinrich, and Fritz had to pay 3,000 Deutschmarks. I know I didn't say that right, but that's the way I done wrote it down, how it's enunciated. So, Deutschmarks, which is alimony, or in the US, we call that child support. And Google was my best friend again on this case, because Deutschmarks are the equivalent of 0.0043 cents per US dollar.
Oh, was that back then?
Yeah. And as of 2002, Germany doesn't use Deutschmarks as their currency. They now use euros, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, so now that Fritz has been ordered to pay for his son, this upstanding citizen that Fritz is turning out to be, he decided, yeah, I'm not paying that. And he took off. He packed his crap, skipped town, and abandoned the woman and their son. Now we're going to fast forward a few years to 1956. He moved to Hamburg, Germany, and was employed as a harbor worker. And at this point, he is 21 years old. However, good old Fritz was involved in a serious accident in 1956.
Here's the head injury.
It's more of a facial injury.
In case you needed the help, that's your head.
He was on a bicycle and he was hit by a car. He suffered permanent damage to his face. The accident left him with a nose that was smashed. It gave him a pronounced squint. His eyes became permanently crossed outwards. And the poor guy had a squint as his speech impediment. So he's struggling.
Just so we're clear, that was the head injury.
It sure was. Now at 22, so 1957, he meets and marries a woman named Inga Balselman. Inga and Fritz were both alcoholics, and they frequented bars together. They would regularly be kicked out of the bars for starting drunken fights with either each other or other fellow bar attendees.
Sounds healthy.
Yep. Neighbors of Inga and Fritz were constantly subjected to listening to their violent fights in their apartment. Eventually, they were evicted from their apartment, where they would bounce from bar to bar and in shelters before this toxic couple separated in 1960, but not before they had a son that they named Fritz III. The reason for the separation wasn't because of their frequent abuse towards each other, but because Inga found out that Fritz was having an affair. So like any toxic relationship, they had trouble quitting each other. So they would do the back and forth, and then she left, she came back, they reconciled, but they separated permanently by 1967. Fritz had lost his job in the shipyard shortly after his marriage ended, and he got a job as a night security guard. He still managed to frequent the local bars regularly. He also regularly was thrown out of those bars for starting fights. He basically carried on with his life as usual. He was just minus his wife and son. Most of the things, by the way, that started the fights was because he was very sensitive about his height, or lack thereof, and people would tell him to sit down. Pipe down, little man.
I thought you were going to say she introduced him as her little husband.
No, this is after she left, but... Anyway, in December 1970, Fritz worked as a night security guard for Shell gas station. He got himself a one-bedroom apartment near the red light district. I have a picture of his room, and I can't quite figure it out, but it looks like it's an attic of a house, but it says that it's a one-bedroom apartment, so it is what it is. We can post the pictures. He decorated his room with pornographic photos. To achieve sexual gratification, he would use a rubber baby doll.
Ew. And by the way, back to your apartment thing, before we get too far off of that, is it's probably just like when people have like a garage apartment kind of thing. It's still, they can rent an apartment, but it's off of the house.
So I know he's got roommates, or not roommates, but fellow tenants that have rooms to rent. So I don't know if it's like kind of like sections of the house, or if it's just... I don't know.
Probably so. A multi-family house kind of thing, and maybe he's got the garage portion, the attic portion.
Yeah, because it's definitely got like the walls of the roof, the angled ceilings. But without his drunken partner Inga, he was left with his rubber doll and Rosie Palm and her 5 friends. But Fritz was still lonely. So what did the lonely menfolk do in the 1970s?
They fashioned themselves pocket pussies.
They sure didn't. They went out in the 70s and found them a prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Fritz, he done found him the toothless prostitutes. I figure he must have tried to pass the women with his teeny tiny pecker, and since he feared they'd bite it, I think somebody must have tried to bite his penis at some point, that he felt that he needed them to only have gums in their mouth. Never occurred to the fella not to beat the women that he wants to boink, because, oh yeah, by the way, he would also beat the prostitutes. However, if the prostitutes would spend the night with him and they didn't piss him off, Fritz thought that they were his soulmates, and he would become slightly obsessed with these ladies.
He does have a head injury.
He sure do. And at some point in 1969, Fritz sought the company of a 42-year-old hairdresser named Gertrude Brauer. She needed some extra funds, so she would occasionally work as a sex worker. Now, Fritz was mad that she was, in fact, a part-time prostitute, but she refused to have sex with him. And I wonder, that's where I'm curious, did she get one look at his junk or one whiff and was like, I don't need the money that bad. Who needs electricity? But horny and angry, Fritz strangled her in his apartment with an old curtain. There's speculation he kept her body around because he was aroused by her corpse.
Ew.
Yes. After her remains began to smell, he tried to carry her body out. However, since he was a bit smaller and notoriously lazy,
Now we know why he went for smaller women.
yep, he realized this is a real struggle. I can't get this lady out of here. Dead weight, and I'm not saying that because she's dead, but like dead weight is a lot heavier.
Not in one piece, at least.
He tried to drag her body to the stairwell where he slipped and fell.
Head injury number 2.
I'm glad that made you laugh because I totally pictured really struggling. Like, you can't picture it with a body because then it's not funny. But I pictured him trying to drag something heavy and like slipping down the stairs and falling. He got real upset. He was super frustrated. So he went out and bought a handsaw and he sawed her corpse into pieces using like a regular hand back and forth kind of saw. That seems like it would take forever to do.
What other handsaw is there, Andrea? Back and forth.
Well, you know what I'm saying. An electric handsaw. This is not an electric handsaw. This is one of them.
I like your sound effects. It helped me picture it.
Good. I'm glad. Well, then he would wrap up all her bits and he stashed her in various places in the nearby area. And by nearby, I mean in front of his apartment building and across the street because it was a lot of work for this here lazy feller.
He was already tired. He fell down the stairs already.
Yeah. His laziness is like beyond anything you could comprehend because to make it worse for little old Fritz, the body parts were found fairly quickly. Some children found her head at a construction site across the street. So all this effort, and she was identified by the Hamburg police fairly quickly. However, this little squirt was lucky because the investigation went cold pretty quick because she had no connection to him, so they had no idea where to even start.
Well, like we've seen plenty of times when prostitutes live that dangerous lifestyle, they don't have any record of their comings or goings, and they don't advertise who they're goings with.
Yeah. Now, that brings us to 1972. He started living with a woman named Irmgard Albrecht. Some articles say that it's a girlfriend. Some say it's possibly a second wife. To me, that's just the details. It doesn't really matter in my opinion. But on August 15th, 1972, Fritz forced himself on a woman named Ruth Duffner. He demanded Ruth to have sex with him and with Irmgard. Again, Fritz was drunk and being violent, and he wrapped a piece of fabric around Ruth's throat and he began to pull it tight, trying to kill her. Luckily for Ruth, she managed to get her hands under the cloth, which stopped Fritz from being able to strangle her. Terrified and lucky to be alive, as soon as the opportunity presented itself, Ruth ran naked from Fritz's apartment, screaming for help. She reported him to police. She received treatment at the hospital, and at the time of the incident, Fritz had been so drunk and he had a super high blood alcohol level. It was reported. He was arrested, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those, he wasn't really arrested because he was still able to be out on bond or out on his own recognizance, which I find is a joke. You just tried to kill somebody, keep his ass in jail, but he's out. Remember Ruth for this case, okay? Ruth Duffner. Remember her. We have another victim named Ruth later. So just remember her specifically, the one that got away. This case will go to court in 2.5 years, but in the meantime, a woman pressing charges does not convince Fritz to, I don't know, stop attacking the lady folk. Instead, it just slows him down. From what I read with the translation, this is around the time that Irmgard leaves Fritz. I think it just pushed her over the edge of, you just got arrested for trying to kill this lady. This got way out of control. I'm done. Now his second woman is gone. He's got charges pending. And 2 years after his attempted murder of Ruth, Fritz brought 54-year-old sex worker Anne Beischel to his apartment in August of 1974. She was not passionate enough when they had sex, which he found frustrating because she didn't want to have sex with Fritz in the first place. She just wanted money for alcohol and drugs. So Fritz said she had to let him boink her and he would give her alcohol and money. So she literally just spread her legs and just sat there and let him have his way. But because she put in zero effort, she just laid still. Poor little old Fritz was giving her some of his best moves and she didn't even make a noise. So enraged, he strangled her to death. That's literally what he told the police when he eventually gets caught, was she didn't appreciate his efforts.
Got nothing on that one.
So enraged, he strangles her to death, right? And then he used his handy dandy saw to dismember Anna's remains. But this time, Fritz decided disposing of her wasn't worth the hassle since the last one was found. So he decided just to wrap all her bits in plastic and shove her into various places around his apartment.
Oh, that sounds disgusting.
And obviously, there'd be an odor, right? Rather than dispose of Anna's remains, Fritz went out and bought himself a box of pine air freshener to try to mask the odor of decaying flesh.
Disgusting.
A few months later, in December of 1974, Fritz brought him another toothless prostitute, 57-year-old Frida Roblick, back to his rank-ass apartment where she made fun of him because he lost his erection during sex. He really just liked having his teeny-weeny suckled on.
You.
But the two began arguing, and he struck Frida. And Frida was pissed. And she's like, oh, hell no, you're not going to smack me. She hit him back, only she hit Fritz upside the head with an alcohol bottle.
There's his third head injury.
And of course, not to be outdone by a woman, Fritz flew into a rage and strangled Frida to death. And just like with Anna, he dismembered Frida and stashed her around the apartment and added a few more pine air fresheners to the apartment. The following month in January, so that's January 1975, he murdered yet another sex worker. This woman's name was Ruth Schultz. She was 52 years old, and he strangled and dismembered her remains, and surprise, surprise, he stashed her around the apartment along with a few more air fresheners.
I thought this was a small apartment.
It is. Trust me. When you see the pictures, you're going to be like, ugh. It's disgusting. It looks like a hoarder's apartment because it's everything. It's so small.
He is. He's hoarding body parts.
So remember Ruth Duffner, the lady who escaped his apartment? Well, on April 4th, 1975, the court ordered him to pay a fine of 4,500 of the doint marks, and the charge of rape was dropped. I don't know how he managed that, but
because she was a prostitute and she just needed her compensation for her time,
I guess. A few months later, the neighbors kept reporting to the police that there was an odor coming from Fritz's apartment.
I imagine there's been an odor coming from his apartment.
Yeah, so they kept complaining, and now they're complaining to police. Fritz told the police it was odors from the foreign neighbors, and the police were like, yeah, their cooking sure is stinky. They came out, they investigated, and that was the findings, was the neighbors cooking.
Well, we don't know what the neighbors were doing.
I figure he must have had a fresh box of pine fresheners right by the door or something. On the evening of July 17th, 1975, when Fritz was at work, his neighbor left a candle burning. I figured they were burning candles to try to drown out the stench coming from his apartment. But that candle caught the building on fire. And firemen that were putting out the fire had to go apartment to apartment, making sure that there was nobody that was left behind, right? Well, one of the firemen found a partially decomposed female torso wrapped in a plastic bag under the stairs up in the attic apartment. Obviously, this doesn't seem right, so the fire department called the police to come search the building. Like I said, Fritz was at work at the time of the fire, so once he was off work, he was promptly brought in to be questioned by police, and because police also interviewed the neighbors about the torso, and it was found upstairs, they were like, He claimed it wasn't his torso, but 2 weeks later, on July 29th, Fritz broke under the police investigation and interview and confessed to murdering the women and claimed that Jack the Ripper told him to do it. Yeah.
All right.
In custody, Fritz said he killed the women after they mocked his preferred oral sex over straight intercourse. What it was is the women were like, man, I'm really going to have to work for this here $20.
I was planning just to relax, maybe take me a nap.
Apparently that got the one lady killed. He retracted his confession in November of 1976, claiming to have not remembered anything. During his trial, Fritz's lawyer argued that Fritz suffered from severe mental illness with a value of deviation, which I did Google it. And all that means is severe mental illness with a value of deviation is that he's not right in the head and his deviant behaviors or actions go against the social norms or expectations, which, duh. It's really not a mental disorder. It means he's got odd behaviors that go against the social norms.
I would say murdering prostitutes is odd.
I would say stashing body parts around your house is odd. But Fritz's lawyer's defense was based around the idea that only the killing of Anna could be classified as murder because of the supposed visions of Jack the Ripper. The court granted the lawyer's application that Fritz should not be found guilty of all 3 other deaths. The final shocking verdict that was read on December 20th, 1976, the court found Fritz guilty on 1 count of murder and 3 counts of manslaughter. And instead of a life sentence, Fritz should be imprisoned for 15 years in a psychiatric hospital for the 4 murders. They said that his habitual use of alcohol was considered a mitigating factor of diminished mental capacity, but I think it was his crossed eyes, smashed nose, small stature, and his speech impediment, and nobody's ever going to convince me that him and his attorney didn't play into his strange looks to manipulate the court.
Well, they probably did.
And the rest of this head scratcher for me, and not just because I read about scabies and lice while reading,
I was going to say.
was that Fritz was released from the hospital in 1993 when he was 58 years old. But if he was given a 15-year sentence in 1976, he was locked up for an extra 2 years, which I thought was kind of strange.
Well, you said a hospital, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe he was doing treatment first.
He never went to prison. He just stayed in the hospital. He was released from the hospital in 1993. So I don't know what made him stay in the hospital for an extra 2 years. Maybe he liked the sponge baths.
Well, I was going to say, is it possible it was 2 years before his trial started? So it's like he spent that time in the hospital and then did his 15 years?
No, he got put into the hospital in 1976 and he didn't get released till 1993. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but when he was arrested, like the time it takes to do the arresting, the case, the trial, the sentencing, because sometimes you do the trial and there's a chunk before the sentencing.
No, he was given a 15-year sentence in 1976. He was released from the hospital in 1993. Well, from his sentencing to his release date, it was 17 years.
But still, for all the murderings.
It's a joke. Once he was released from the hospital, he moved into a nursing home. 58 doesn't seem old enough to be in a nursing home to me.
But he was also an alcoholic, so he has been hard on his body.
Yeah.
And apparently he wasn't washing it regular, so.
And they gave him a new name. So he went to the nursing home under the name of Peter Jensen. And he died in the hospital on October 19th, 1998, with complications from his abundance of alcohol and heavy smoking. He was only 63 when he died. Time for some of Andy's fun facts here. Fritz seemed to have an unaddressed health issue aside from his mental health. And I have a photo of what supposedly, I don't know if you're going to remember me sending you this picture, Claire. I'm going to send it to you again.
Is it his David?
No, it's his hands.
You mean his paws? I remember it.
You remember his hands?
Because it's the weird fingernail curling thing.
Yeah.
Like where they
So
shape downwards. I don't.
That would be the picture of his hands to refresh your memory holes. But we'll post the pictures that we have on Facebook. But I spent probably an unhealthy amount of time obsessing over his hands. And I found if this photo is in fact of Fritz's hands, hours, Claire. I have spent hours investigating and researching why his hands look the way they do. If these are his hands, it's a severe case of what's called finger clubbing. And according to the Cleveland Clinic, digital clubbing can be hereditary or congenital, which means you're born with it. And clubbing usually indicates more other serious health issues involving your lungs, heart, or digestive system. And clubbing is a physical sign characterized by bulbous enlargements of the ends of one or more fingers or toes. I thought it was interesting. There's a test that you can do. If you hold 2 opposing fingers back to back against each other, there's a diamond shape that would normally appear between the nail beds and the nails of the 2 fingers. If you get that little window, then your fingers are normal. If you have clubbing, the space or window is missing.
Well, it could also be part of his brain issues.
Yeah. Well, it's generally, if you suffer from finger clubbing, it's normally just a sign that you have something else causing it. But another fun fact, in 1975, German musician Karl Heinz Blumberg recorded the single Jern hab ich die Frang, blah, 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 which I don't know how to say it.
It was absolutely
Awful.
horrendous. And we apologize to the German people for Andrea's reading.
I don't even know how I would say that. But anyway, it translates to I love to saw the women.
All right.
The song quickly became an underground hit in the Hamburg clubs. Then the German songwriter Heinz Struck wrote a novel that's translated into The Golden Glove, which was published in 2016, and it won some literature prize and was nominated for another prize or whatever. It tells the story of Fritz Honka and bears the name of one of the bars that he frequented and met his lady folk at. And then a German director acquired the rights to the novel and made it into a movie, which was released in 2019. And if you speak German or don't mind reading subtitles, it's available on Amazon Prime or on Prime Video, and it's called The Golden Glove. And if this murderous man hasn't received yet enough notoriety, in July 2020, that German band Ostfront released that song that I played in the beginning called Honka Honka, and I translated the lyrics from German to English, and it's literally his crimes. I took a screenshot of the lyrics. We'll post those too. It's very sick. They even name his victims in it.
I don't even know how that would be a hit.
I don't know. I don't know how it would be a hit either, but I played the song for you earlier, and it was interesting to read the lyrics that went with it. But that is Fritz Honka. I was curious what happened to his kids, but good luck.
Did you watch the movie?
I started to, and then I was like, yeah, I'm one of those people.
It's real low budget and weird.
Yeah, not only that, but I'm not a huge subtitles person. I like to be able to put something on and do stuff, unless I'm going to sit down with Jason and watch it, and he's not big into these types of movies. He'd probably just do some blinking and be like, why are you making me watch this? And I'd be like, you need to get your daily dose of reading in.
And watch these toothless prostitutes.
Yeah, it's weird.
The story itself is weird. I can only imagine the movie.
I found it kind of funny that he ends up being caught because the odor from him choosing to be a lazy shit and leave the bodies in his apartment.
No, that's not why he got caught. It's the fire.
Yeah, but I guarantee you that the neighbors were burning candles to try to drown out the stench coming from his apartment.
Dude, the smell of the pine saw would have gotten me.
And he would just stash them all over the place. And when they'd start to lose some of their smell or the odors were overpowering, he would just add more to it. He's disgusting.
Yeah. So it reminds me of the movie Seven, where that one feller he actually wasn't dead yet. But when they go in there and there's air fresheners hanging all over the ceiling.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
That's what I picture, because they're like, oh my god, the smell. But the guy is like shriveled up, but he had been there for weeks, just deteriorating. And he had chewed off his own tongue.
I just sent you a picture of what his face looks like.
Because it looks like he walked full speed into a wall and his nose is flat. Or did they take that picture with his face pressed up against a window?
Nope, that's just his face hole. By the time he was in court, he was bald.
I feel bad for his children.
Yeah. That's a picture of his apartment.
I don't know how he had several bodies in there.
Well, there's a room off to the side, so I don't know what room that is because it said it's a one bedroom. And his bed looks like a couch.
Yeah, it does look like a couch. Well, I mean, it is a couch, but the dolls. He's got a stuffed animal in the corner, which is just weird. It kind of looks like a tissue box next to the bed with a toolbox. I don't know what the hell is all over the table.
I don't know.
With the trash bag. Oh, is that a jacket or a trash bag?
I don't know. I didn't take the picture.
It's a little concerning, the dolls.
It's weird.
With the pornographic pictures, which they're not. I mean, they're just naked ladies. I mean, which I guess is porn, but it looks like they came out of like underwear magazines rather than being porn.
Yeah.
Ew, there are two stuffed animals, one on either end of his couch.
Yeah. It's disgusting.
This is like one of those find it pictures, and it doesn't even look like he's got a door. It looks like a curtain.
It is a curtain.
I know, but like, I don't know if that's like to his closet Or is there just a curtain of that separates his room?
I don't know, because in the edge it looks like there's like some sort of little shelf right there.
It also looks like another couch.
Well,
Having a shower was extra. That's why he was stinky.
it's also why he had him a case of the scabies.
He's just real itchy.
But that's all I got.
Well, thanks for that.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the